Hi, you're watching the Economical Triathlete, and I'm Jordan. And this episode, I want to talk about probably the biggest purchase you're going to have to make in order to get into triathlons, and that's the bike. If this is your first triathlon, I really think you should go out and borrow a bike before you go purchase one for your first triathlon. So then after you've done your first triathlon, then decide if you want to put the money in to buy a bike. If you've already done a triathlon and you're fairly certain that you want to do triathlon to get a bike, there's a couple different kind of bikes out there that you might want to think about getting. And kind of here's how I group them. And you got your basic road bike, you got your triathlon bike, and there's also a time trial bike, which is very similar to the triathlon bikes, but there's a few differences that can make a big difference in the comfort for triathlons or the rules in order to race in a time trial race. And there's also some other bikes you might consider depending on what you can use it mostly for, which is there's cyclocross bikes and a commuter bike, or maybe it's kind of like a touring bike. Those are kind of the same thing in my mind. So a road bike, or what you think of a regular bike, it has those drop down bars. It usually has the shifters kind of on the brakes. Some road bikes have the shifters on levers, up on the top of the frame somewhere. I really don't think you should try to get a bike like that. Really try to find one where the shifters are integrated into the brakes somewhere. And your triathlon bike, which the biggest factor for a triathlon bike versus most of the other bikes is that it's designed to have the saddle in front of what you call the bottom bracket, or the cranks, or the pedals. By having that saddle a little forward of that, it becomes much easier to be in an aerodynamic position and stay there comfortably. Time trial bikes, they have to have that saddle behind it, and it's more difficult to get that comfortable and aggressive position. In some bikes, you can kind of flip between that time trial legal position and the triathlon legal position. And there's also differences in rules for the type of frame that you can use in a triathlon versus a time trial bike. In triathlons, you might see some weird bikes, like a beam bike, which I happen to own, which is legal in triathlons, but they're not legal in time trial races. And then there's also the size and shapes of for the frame that they can use. A lot of triathlon-specific bikes, they can use a more faster aerodynamic frame versus a time trial frame. So there's that to keep in mind between those two bikes. They look very similar. And they're cyclocross bikes, which are going to be better to have bigger tires to handle to go off-road more. And there's also your touring or commuter bikes, which are usually going to be more robust. Sometimes they're made out of steel to be able to hold more weight for when you're packing things on and going for longer trips. So you got to think about what you're going to be using this for. I'm going to be using on the road mostly, and maybe riding around with a lot of friends outside around the city. You might be better off getting a road bike. If you're going to be mostly doing triathlons and be riding by yourself a lot, or maybe training indoors with it on a bike trainer, which another thing you should consider is getting your own bike trainer to put your bike on or to train. And then time trial bikes, if you think you're going to get into that and not so much triathlons, you might want to get a cyclocross bike. It's a really versatile bike. You can also use it for commuting too very well. You can fit fenders on them really easily. And there's also then your touring ones, if you can do a lot of commuting maybe, and then kind of race here and there. You should go get a touring or a commuter bike. For the touring and commuter bike, still try to find that drop-down handlebar with the shifters integrated into the brakes. So again, we're trying to talk about kind of economics, and if you're on a budget, I really recommend you don't worry about the weight of the bike at all. For triathlons, I mean, the race is pretty much going to start and stop at the same altitude or elevation, and weight hardly factors into it. I would think you should only consider weight when it comes to maybe trying to pick up the bike on your own. You might have to carry it somewhere, taking it out of back of a truck or something. If that's annoying, then you might want to consider weight. But it's not going to make that big of a difference in your racing. So besides weight, which you hear people talk about, oh, I'm trying to get a light bike and go faster, it's not that big of a deal in my mind. And the second thing that I think it's that big of a deal, if you're on a budget, is the type of components you're going to find on the bike. Again, I'm just going to emphasize it's best to have the brakes and the shifters integrated and not have the shifter on levers on different parts of the frame. You're really going to think that's pretty convenient to have the brakes and shifters together. But when it comes to the front derailleur, the rear derailleur, the chain rings, and the cassette in the back, like those components, it's really not that big of a deal. Your shifters and everything might not be quite as crisp, quite as sharp as some of the more expensive components, but it'll suffice just fine for the racing triathlons. So if you're going to take your bike out in the rain or the roads are really dirty and you got a lot of grime on your bike, just take a cloth and wipe down the frame and all the components, and everything should last a good time. Another thing to consider are the aerodynamics of the frame. So you might want to look to see how your brakes are going to be kind of maybe hidden from the wind, or the cables and the routing of the cables kind of be hidden from the wind. But really the most important thing about making an aerodynamic bike is actually how well it fits you, because your body is going to be anywhere from 70 to 90% of the drag. So your own body going through the air is probably going to be roughly 80% of the force you're trying to overcome. And then the rest, 15% is going to be the bike, and maybe 5% the rolling resistance. Not quite sure on those numbers. But it's more important for the aerodynamics to really get the bike to put you in a position that makes you aerodynamic and comfortable. And when I say comfortable, I would try and put it in terms that I would be able to ride this bike for 3 hours and enjoy it in this aerodynamic position. So if you're going to buy a bike, there's really kind of, I think, 3 places you can kind of go to get a bike in general. You can go get it used somewhere, so like eBay or Craigslist, but you really need to have some trust in the seller there, and that you know what you're getting, and that there hasn't been any crash with the wheels, and that everything's true, because the last thing you want to do is be in the middle of the race or on the road and have something fail on you on the bike that could be catastrophic. So you really want to have some trust in the seller and be mechanically inclined to fix things. And I forget about this sometimes, also have the time to fix them. The second thing you can do if you're on a budget is you can go online and get it from a reputable seller. One that I always point people to is Bikes Direct, and I'll try to put a link down in the description below so you can check them out. It's a good place to go to get an idea how much bikes can cost without kind of the high markup when you go to a store. And again, if you're going to get it online, you should be mechanically inclined and have time to work on the bike. So the third place to go is kind of a last resort if you're on a budget and you're not very good at do-it-yourself projects and you don't have a lot of time, is just go to a local bike shop and tell them what you're looking for, what you're going to do with it mostly, and they'll also try to give you an idea of how to get yourself fit on the right size. One thing I haven't given enough emphasis on this episode is getting the right size of bike for your size. So let's say you're 6 foot, 56 centimeter bike is usually what's going to fit you best for most brands. You can probably fit in a 54, you can probably fit in a 58, but you really should try to find that middle of the road bike, and then from there you'll be able to make your adjustments on the saddle height and kind of the fore and aft of the handlebars and the drop of the handlebars to get it to fit you best. I'll also kind of walk you through what happened to me when I first got into triathlons. My first race was on what they call a hybrid bike. I had a flat handlebar with, you know, the mountain bike kind of shifters, and that's what I raced my first triathlon on. And then I got hooked, and so then I went out and go buy a bike, and I thought I'd be on the roads a lot, and at the time I thought carbon fiber would make things more comfortable. I don't really believe that anymore. Carbon fiber is lighter, it's stiffer than aluminum, but I really wish I would have gotten a cheaper aluminum bike instead of a carbon fiber bike. And now in retrospect, I also wish I didn't get a road bike. I wish I would have got a triathlon bike, because that's what I ended up getting anyways. And I basically train indoors 95% of the time. I really don't train that much outside, because I am kind of scared of going on the roads with a lot of the cars around. I know I'm going to get dinged for that from some of the comments, but that's what I do. I basically train indoors. And if I were to do it again, I mean, I might consider getting a road bike first and then a triathlon bike, but I would get a very inexpensive bike. I'd probably go to Bikes Direct, pick one up for about $350 or $400, and that can kind of be my beat 'em up bike if I want to go outside when it's really bad outside. And then I would go get my triathlon bike and a bike trainer and use that for most of my hardcore training. Thanks for watching. If you have any comments or questions or critiques, you know, please put them in the comments below, and I'll try to respond to them. And please, you know, hit like and subscribe. Thanks.